Hello and welcome to a new episode of Leadership Lanes. Today we have Ronak Sutaria with us. He's the founder and CEO of Respirer Living Sciences, a startup with a mission to develop strong, impact-focused manufacturing and data-driven solutions that help with evidence-based policies and quality of living. Welcome, Ronak, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Abhijit.
So let's start with talking about Respire Living Sciences, your trust with IoT, climate, and data. Can you give more details on that?
So IoT actually, I think the first time I got aware or exposed to this technology was in 2004 when I was actually doing my master's in the US. So I had taken courses on wireless sensor networks. So back then, there was no term called IoT. And 2004, 2005 is when I did my MS in computer science. And that time, I got familiar with the underlying protocols and operating systems that are used to build sensor networks. So I took a course with a professor, Christian Borsia, actually, I remember. So we focused the entire course was on routing protocols and various different protocols that make up the IoT stack. So I started, dabbling into it. We had OS, I forget the name of that OS now, but a tiny OS actually, yeah, now that I remember. So that was the OS that we used in our courses. And I got pretty fascinated with that whole concept that you can have a mesh of, sensors across a country, and they completely independently transmitting data, independent of the other infrastructure and communications network. So that I found quite interesting. My master's thesis, I also dabbled a little bit in low-powered routing. So I implemented some routing protocols and things. So I got exposed to the technology over there. And then I kept a track of it, the developments that were happening. And then I think in 2008, 2009, I saw the first live sensor network in San Francisco. So I used to live in SF. For about 5 years, I lived in SF, and I saw it. The folks at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and Nokia Research were implementing, in fact, air quality networks using sensors. So that's when I kind of got a little bit more familiar with that. And so I think those were my exposures to the technology. And then when I came back to India, I felt this will be an interesting, relevant application to explore. So 2010, very December 2009, when I moved back, I kind of started discussing this with a few people and initially didn't get a lot of traction. But then 2015, I actually started wanted to make a startup around sensor networks. So I quit my full-time job and built a agricultural sensor network for disease prediction of crops. So we tried doing that, and that didn't really take off after a year of effort. So me and a roommate of mine were attempting that. And then we got some funding from a group in Bombay. So that's when we decided to give this a shot.
Uh, that's fascinating, actually. And when you say 2004, it goes back a long way. I know you for a few years, and you've been always into the IoT aspect of things. And uh, I also had tried to jump into IoT, and I come from a software background. And what is your experience in designing and manufacturing these IoT solutions, typically in India? I'm assuming you do it in India, or is it? Uh, so what
No,
is your Oh, okay. Um, so what is your experience being designing and manufacturing any sort of devices? Now it's a climate, but even before this, what has your experience been uh, in the hardware side of things for IoT?
I think the designing part, there are a lot of capable people around. The design engineers, the electronics people who do the designing. Definitely there is good talent here. I think yeah. So from a design perspective, I think we had good traction. Not traction, but essentially we did man. I mean, so to answer your question, we are fully manufactured in India. We design things here, we print our boards here, we assemble the boards here. Components, of course, is a mixed thing. I mean, we
Hmm,
source some from
hmm,
abroad and some
yeah.
from India, but the complete fabrication and assembly is done in-house over here. I would say the quality of the turnaround times are longer in India. Frankly, when we started making our hardware, we used to send it to China, to Seed Studio.
Mm,
And it was faster and cheaper to send it there, get it printed, and have the stuff come back than to get it done literally in our own city. So I think the entire system abroad, particularly in China, is very streamlined. The quality is also very good. So to the credit of the system set up over there, they are very good. Uh, but over time, we now started moving things here. They do tend to be a little more expensive than doing it abroad. But I think for us, because we can then make quick changes and we build a little bit of a rapport with the local guys. So cumulatively, I would say manufacturing, we are still not doing very large volumes. Honestly, we are
mm,
doing mid
mm,
scale. We print maybe like 1,000 boards at a time, and I won't call that high volume, but it's not very small volumes either. So till this scale, it's still working out here. But if we hit, let's say 10,000, we will definitely relook at the whole thing and see where things are looking better. That's the basic, very elementary printing of things. The actual quality, I would say, we are still not hitting large volumes, so we've not heavily invested in the quality of the things, which we plan to do now subsequently. But that's the
mm.
hardware journey.
Coming back to Respirer Living Sciences, and this is closely related with climate and quality of life. So, what impact do you see with the data that you have generated from these devices over all these years, actually?
So, we kind of got into air quality through a data journalism organization. They wanted to build awareness. Back in 2015, when we got funded for this work, there was no real air quality network outside of the government. So the whole
Mm,
idea was that can there be an independent air quality network which is run, outside of the government, because otherwise this was seen as activity which needs to be done by them. So the very first impact was that, this started getting talked about and featured on front pages. And I think our takeoff happened in January 2016 when the odd even was just being
mm,
rolled out in India. Delhi was hitting very high levels. And suddenly the data from our network got featured on every major news channel, because we were the only independent network, in Delhi, which had about 40 monitors. So, we found ourselves in the eye of the storm, and everybody, picked up the data, started reporting on it. So that created a lot of awareness that, because the government data, had its own idiosyncrasies. So those kind of it started from there. The impact has grown significantly in many different directions. For us, the most gratifying part is that there have been groups which have taken this technology to the absolute poorest regions of India, from an air pollution perspective. So if you know India, the thermal power plant in the coal belt of India is in Chhattisgarh. The majority, more than 50% of India's coal-fired electricity is generated from one state of India, Chhattisgarh, and they are amongst the poorest. And they
that's
breathe
true.
the
Yeah.
dirtiest air because coal, when it's burnt, it gives out huge amounts of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and of course particulate matter, and those are carcinogenic. PM 2.5 is a carcinogenic substance. So I think for us, it was very gratifying that a lot of this technology was installed in homes of people who were near the thermal power plants, who were working in the plants but were not getting any benefits and were bearing the brunt of, living there. So suddenly, this equipment started helping quantify the quality of air they were breathing. You could put a number to how bad the situation was. Well, otherwise, they just had to describe it through, how bad things were. But now we could tell them, report it on a daily basis, tell them when the stack was emitting and what was the impact of it. So I think that was one significant impact we saw. There were groups, who started doing long-term analysis. There were, a lot of think tanks and policy research groups in India which started looking at this data, because this data is reported every minute, from hundreds of locations. Currently, we have over 2,000 locations.
Mm.
where this technology is installed. So a lot of data-driven think tanks started reporting long-term trends. Policymakers also, of course, took note of it. They started looking at what kind of hotspots are existing in the cities, where can they focus more efforts on. Industry also came forward. They started taking this technology for, I mean, there is something called occupational safety and health guidelines, OSHA guidelines. And so far they were doing it through expensive technology. Now through, 1/10 the cost, they were able to estimate what is their employee safety and health in large and heavy industries. City governments in India, there is a program called NCAP, the National Clean Air Program. So where they disperse funds to city governments on where they should focus their efforts. So over there, they are, using this kind of technology to understand where to put more efforts. So that's broadly the landscape of where people are using this.
Interesting. That was my next question about your model, and it is completely a B2B model, I assume, based on what you said. It is more from a manufacturing unit or mines, etc., that you cater to. That's
Yeah, largely our revenue comes from policy, no, but yeah, mainly industry related deployments. And good part of it also has been used by city governments. So you can say a
okay.
B2G and a B2B model. But B2G is, right now through the scientific research angle. There are large funds being disbursed to scientific organizations to do research at city scale. So in that, we have a large number of projects. And I would say the balance 50% is from the industrial focus areas. Yeah.
Got that. That's insightful, actually. Um, so moving on to to my next question, and in today's world with AI emerging, data is looked at more importantly than ever, uh, and the focus on data is much more than it was ever earlier. So how do you see AI play a role in IoT?
So AI, which is what is the term now, but back when I was being master, there was machine learning and neural networks and things. Primarily, the way we see these kind of learning-based models, uh, the immediate application or the very first one is to improve the accuracy of the data. There are ways you can do several different regression techniques, or there are tree-based techniques, random forest, neural networks. So you can use some of these models to improve the accuracy. When you have the reference data, the independent data and the dependent data, you build certain models for different seasons, different, heuristic patterns. And once you've identified a pattern in your sensor data, then you can improve the accuracy of the sensor data. So that I think is the most immediate and relevant technique for machine learning. Correlation is the other avenue where you want to get a better context to your data. So your data is reporting something, but why is it reporting something? And what is the larger context? So over there, you need a few relevant other data streams, and you try to build correlation models saying that, okay, in our case, I can tell you if this is the land use, if this is, so many industries are there, so much traffic is there, then the air quality data can become a proxy for certain other attributes. And that is all done through models. AI and machine learning, besides these things, in our field, you can try to identify more. Again, it largely is a context driven application, but understanding what really is happening on the ground. So how can you make your sensor data be a proxy for certain other most relevant and credible, activities that could be going on? So that tends to be one other application area. There is also about, if you're doing large scale sensor networks, then where to install them, and models are being used to better understand. Like, just to give an example in air quality, let's say you have a city which is spread over 5,000 square kilometers, and you have, let's say, 500 monitors to install. Then it becomes an optimization problem, that what is the aspect of the work that you want to optimize. So you can use an AI model over there. And I will just put a caveat that right now, in all our projects, AI is the big buzz. Honestly, everybody is asking us, what is AI that you're going to use? All funders want to know, or investors want to know about AI. Honestly, AI comes in the last 10%. So I would like to highlight this, that AI, honestly, while it plays an important role, and every engineer who's applying to us wants to only work on AI problems, the reality is that if they don't work on the preceding 90% of the problems, we actually don't engage them on the last AI leg, because AI leg comes once everything is in place. The hardware has to be high quality, your software systems have to be very, very well established. So we look for full stack skills before we look for AI skills. So AI is a good tool, but it's like a coating on a painting, I mean, or something which is going to improve the last mile of the project. It is important, it's a differentiator, but there are as many and more challenging problems that we solve. So that's, but from an investor perspective, everybody has asked us, what's the AI that you are using? So that's the reality of our world today. Mm.
I mean, you couldn't have been more precise, to be honest. And that's the scenario here in New York as well, actually, wherein from an investor perspective, everyone is asking about AI. And at times, I've seen even the founders don't know what AI they are implementing, and it's just become a buzzword, to be
I
honest.
think a simple linear regression, y is equal to mx plus c is can be called AI today. I mean, or just a quadratic equation, we did it in mathematics 101, is what is being labeled as, I mean, I'm seeing so many decks with just a simple quadratic equation, which is being tagged as an AI model.
That is
So
true. That is true.
that's the
Uh,
reality of it's, yeah, that's what it is.
so coming on to the next aspect, and this is something which I think about from a compliance and a governance perspective, especially in the climate and the air quality domain, because I'm pretty sure you might deal with a lot of government-related policies, government-related norms, etc. So, what is your take on that from a data analytics perspective or an AI perspective? Second is from this perspective, from the same compliance and governance perspective, the standards I believe might be changing a lot. And do you have to deal with a lot of devices that need to be upgraded? Are there like you recall the devices, then upgrade and send it back? And right now you said those are in thousands, so that might be easier. But do you see that as a challenge later on when, as and when the devices go on increasing?
So our work is in a heavily regulated domain. What happens is
Yeah.
industrial pollution, there are a lot of financial penalties associated with it. So in India, in the US, there is a US EPA, and they have an industrial emissions monitoring program. Similarly, in India, there's CPCB, the Central Pollution Control Board, and the state pollution control boards. So industrial pollution monitoring is a very regulated activity. You can't just start putting equipment and start reporting data and say that, okay, there is pollution happening, not happening, because it has legal implications. So there is a compliance element to it. Um, so for now, even the data which is used by the regulators, it can be generated only from equipment which is, so to speak, you know, what they call US EPA approved equipment. So there are certain standards and norms which have been set up, which India is following broadly, which were created by the EPA. India has adapted some of these locally also, of course. So for industrial pollution, there is those compliance requirements. For ambient awareness related things, anybody can set up a network. So today, if you are living in a city, let's say Nagpur or Nashik or wherever, and you want to set up an air quality network, you're free to do that. And you're free to start analyzing that data and start reporting on it. There is a term called air quality index. The AQI is
Yeah.
something which
Yeah.
publicly can be demonstrated only by the government. So in India, there is actually a law which says that if you are running a private network, you can't start displaying AQIs, because that, if they say, is misleading, then it creates, too much problems for the government. So the AQI computation, there is some regulation around it. and not everybody can just start putting EQI numbers out there. But the underlying physical measurements of the pollutants can be done by anybody who wants to do it. So having said that, the compliance around the AI models, I think what happens is that, the underlying data has certain level of compliances. So all the government projects we do sign a contract saying that the data exclusively belongs to the government. So because they're funding it, so it goes back to them. So there is a lot of restrictions on the data itself. So, and then subsequently on the models that are built on the data. So I don't think the compliance is related to AI per se, but it's related to the underlying data.
Hmm.
So that's definitely happening in India, more on the industrial side of activities than on the other.
Got it. And I'm assuming these regulations change quite, I wouldn't say quite frequently, but they keep on updating. And does that impact your hardware? And do you have regular scenarios where you have to recall, upgrade, and send it back?
So upgrading happens not because of compliances, but just because of, better algorithms that we build for our own calibrations and things. So we've come up with better ways of transmitting data. We've come up with better ways of calibrating the data. We do have over the air. So we have an OTA
Hmm.
in our
Hmm.
devices
Hmm.
and we can push firmware onto the boxes. We've even done it in places like South Africa and all. So we have our
Hmm.
solution installed in international countries outside India, and we managed to push code into them remotely. So we build those features out, and that does work for us.
That is still software. About hardware, it's not as frequent as you would
So hardware
expect.
we actually recalled, and it's a very
Okay.
cumbersome process. So we've
Hmm.
recalled
Hmm.
hardware devices even from abroad. So we spend months, dealing with getting equipment back, sending it back. But those are the realities of being in a hardware-driven business.
Coming to my last question, and this is more from a personal perspective. So, your startup is a lot about how we as humans breathe. And does that give you a sense of responsibility and content when you run the startup?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I had never really associated our persistent coughs and, runny noses with the quality of air that we breathe, both indoor and outdoor. But now, actually, with the family, in fact, one of the reasons we've come about 500 kilometers from where we live right now, where I am, is because the pollution in the city where I am, I have a very young kid and it gets bad, so we tend to get out of the city, which earlier we may not have done so judiciously. But now I think our awareness is a little bit higher in terms of what's affecting them at the very, very, infant uh, growing years. So when we know the peak pollution weeks are coming, we kind of try to stay, somewhere else. But yeah, to answer your question, there is a sense of responsibility and there is a sense of contentment that we are doing work which is impacting the quality of living for people, for sure. And but there's a lot left to be done. There's also a recognition that air is one of the problems we are tackling, and Indian cities have a lot of other problems also, which can be helped by this kind of technology.
That is true, actually, you absolutely nailed it. In fact, yeah, I mean, I can see IoT being used in drainage systems, etc. I'm not sure if it is already being used or not, but it can be helped there as well a lot in the public civic spaces. So, yep, I guess that's
Yeah,
it for this episode, Ronak. It was great hearing from you. Thanks a lot for coming.
yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Abhijit. Nice being here with you. Thanks a lot for having me.